Chapter 1. The Blizzard's Overture. The train from Brussels to the Swiss Alps had been a masterpiece of discomfort, thought Hercule Poirot as he stepped onto the snow-dusted platform at the tiny station of Val-de-Neige. The air was sharp enough to slice bread, and the wind carried the promise of a storm. Poirot, wrapped in his thickest overcoat, his moustache impeccably waxed despite the cold, surveyed the scene with mild disapproval. He had come here for rest, absolute undisturbed rest, after the exhausting case of the Oriental Express affair that had lingered in the newspapers far too long. A quiet chalet, hot chocolate, perhaps a small puzzle in the form of a crossword, and no murders. That had been the plan. A horse-drawn sleigh awaited him, the driver bundled like a bear. The journey up the winding mountain road took nearly an hour, during which Poirot reflected on the folly of seeking solitude in a place renowned for its winter isolation. At last, the sleigh crested a ridge, and there it stood, the Chalet de Mélodie, a grand wooden mansion built by some eccentric millionaire with a passion for music. Its steep roof was already heavy with snow, and warm light spilled from tall windows onto the pristine white terrace. Poirot was greeted at the door by the owner himself, Monsieur Philippe Laurent, a jovial man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and the slightly frantic air of a host who feared his guests might devour one another before dessert. "Monsieur Poirot, what an honour! We are a small party this week, mostly musicians. The Vienna Symphony's Chamber Orchestra is here for a private retreat. A special performance tomorrow evening for a select audience of patrons. You will enjoy it, I am certain." Poirot inclined his head politely. Musicians. He had nothing against music, quite the contrary, but musicians in close quarters often produced more drama than harmony. Still, he reminded himself, he was here to rest. Laurent led him through a vast entrance hall where a log fire roared. The walls were lined with portraits of famous composers, and a grand piano dominated one corner. Voices drifted from an adjoining salon. Laughter, a raised tone, then the sudden scrape of a violin bow. "Your room is on the second floor, monsieur. Dinner at 8. The orchestra is rehearsing in the music hall this afternoon, but they will join us later." Poirot unpacked with his usual precision, arranging his toiletries in perfect rows. From his window, he could see the valley far below, already disappearing under swirling snow. The forecast had warned of a blizzard. Good, he thought. No one would come or go for days. Perfect for rest. At 7:30, he descended to the salon for an aperitif. The musicians had arrived, and the room hummed with their presence. First to catch his eye was Isabella Voss, the prima donna violinist. Tall, raven-haired, with the kind of beauty that made men forget their own names. She stood by the fireplace, glass of champagne in hand, laughing at something said by the man beside her, Maestro Elias Frost, the conductor. Frost was in his early 60s, silver-haired, imperious, with the posture of a man who believed the world rotated to his baton. His eyes, sharp and pale blue, flicked constantly around the room, assessing, commanding. Near the window sat Lydia Thorne, the pianist, a delicate woman in her 30s with nervous hands that even now fluttered like trapped birds. She watched Frost with an expression Poirot could not quite read, admiration, perhaps, or resentment. At the piano itself, tuning it idly, was the second conductor, Adrian Keller. Younger, handsome in a brooding way, with dark curls and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He glanced often at Frost, and Poirot noted the tightness around his mouth. Others filled the room. Dr. Harlan Reed, the cellist, a scholarly man with round spectacles who spoke softly but intensely about Bach. Victor Kane, the bassoonist, loud and red-faced, already on his third whiskey. Elena Moreau, the harpist, ethereal and quiet, her fingers plucking invisible strings in the air. And finally, the composer in residence, Gustav Lang, a thin, intense man who chain-smoked Turkish cigarettes and muttered to himself. Poirot accepted a glass of cur from a waiter and observed. Already the currents were visible. Isabella leaned close to Frost, her hand on his arm. Keller watched them, his jaw set. Lydia's gaze followed Keller. Reed argued amiably with Lang about a passage in Mahler. Kane laughed too loudly at nothing. Dinner was announced, and they moved to the dining room, a long table beneath crystal chandeliers. Poirot found himself seated between Eleanor Moreau and Dr. Reed. Conversation flowed. The program for tomorrow's concert: Beethoven, Brahms, a new work by Lang, the difficulties of transporting instruments in snow, the generosity of their patron who had rented the entire chalet. As the main course was served, roast venison with juniper berries, the wind outside began to howl in earnest. Snow lashed the windows. Laurent rose to reassure everyone that the chalet was well stocked for a week if needed. After dinner, the party moved to the music hall, a magnificent room at the rear of the chalet, with tiered seating and a small stage. The orchestra's instruments were already arranged. Strings in front, woodwinds behind, harp gleaming gold at the side, percussion discreetly placed. An ice sculpture of a treble clef stood in one corner, commissioned for the occasion, already beginning to weep in the warmth. Maestro Frost clapped his hands. "A short rehearsal, my friends. We must be perfect for tomorrow." The musicians took their places. Poirot settled into a velvet chair near the back, prepared to enjoy the music despite his fatigue. They began with Beethoven's Romance in F major. Isabella's violin sang, pure and heartbreaking. Frost conducted with sweeping gestures, his face alight with passion. The sound filled the hall, rich and flawless. Then came Brahms. The cello solo in the second movement was taken by Reed, deep, mournful, exquisite. Poirot closed his eyes, allowing the music to wash over him. But during the third piece, Lang's new composition, a modernist work full of dissonance, something shifted. The orchestra faltered. A wrong entry from the bassoon. Kane swore under his breath. Frost stopped the music with a sharp cut of his hand. "Victor, you are half a beat late, again." Kane flushed. "The part is badly copied. The rhythm is impossible." "It is not impossible," Frost snapped. "It is challenging. You will master it." Keller leaned forward from his seat in the audience. "Perhaps if we adjusted the tempo slightly—" "No!" Frost turned on him. "The tempo is marked. You are not conducting this piece, Adrian." Keller subsided, but his eyes burned. Isabella lowered her violin. "Elias, darling, we are all tired. The blizzard—" "We will continue," Frost said firmly, "once more, from the allegro." They began again. This time the playing was tighter, almost fierce. But Poirot, ever sensitive to atmosphere, felt the tension beneath the notes: anger, jealousy, ambition, fear. As the final chord died away, a particularly violent gust rattled the windows. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Frost lowered his baton. "Enough for tonight. Tomorrow we shall be magnificent." The musicians began packing instruments. Chatter resumed, lighter now, relieved. Poirot rose, intending to retire. He paused near the ice sculpture. A puddle had formed at its base, and something caught his eye. A small glass vial, half hidden in the melted water, its label in a language he did not immediately recognize. He bent to retrieve it, but at that moment Laurent appeared, clapping his hands. "To the salon, everyone! Cognac and chocolate by the fire before bed!" The vial was forgotten in the movement of people. Poirot allowed himself to be swept along, though a faint unease stirred in his mind, the kind that always preceded the intrusion of crime into his carefully ordered world. Outside, the blizzard descended in full force, sealing the chalet in a white cocoon. No roads would be passable by morning, no telephone lines would hold. They were cut off, 12 souls in a palace of music, with passions simmering beneath polished manners. Hercule Poirot sipped his cognac and listened to the wind scream. Somewhere in the distance, a single discordant note lingered in his memory, like a warning. He did not yet know that by dawn the orchestra would be missing its conductor, and that the little grey cells would be summoned once more into service. Chapter 2. The Silent Symphony. Hercule Poirot woke to absolute silence. That was the first wrong note. In a mountain chalet during a blizzard, one expects the wind to moan against the eaves, the timbers to creak, perhaps the distant clank of a radiator. Instead, there was nothing, no howl, no whisper, only a muffled stillness so complete that it pressed upon the ears like cotton wool. He glanced at his pocket watch on the bedside table. 7:42 a.m. The grey light filtering through the curtains told him the storm still raged, yet the world outside had been smothered into quiet. Poirot rose, performed his meticulous toilette, waxed his moustaches to perfect symmetry, and dressed with care. Something in that unnatural silence disturbed the order of his thoughts. By the time he descended to the breakfast room at 8:15, the other guests were already assembled, speaking in lowered voices. The great windows showed only swirling white. Snow had piled against the glass almost to the sills. Monsieur Laurent moved among the tables pouring coffee, his usual joviality replaced by a strained politeness. "Bon matin, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "The telephone lines are down, as expected, but we are warm and well provisioned. The orchestra will rehearse again at 10, and tonight's concert will proceed for our small party of patrons. They arrived yesterday before the worst of the storm." Poirot noted the empty chair at the head of the table. "And Maestro Frost?" Laurent hesitated. "He is not yet down. He often rises early to study scores in the music hall. Perhaps he is already there." Isabella Voss, pale beneath her usual composure, set down her cup. "He was not in his room when I passed just now. The door was ajar, the bed untouched." Adrian Keller looked up sharply. "Untouched? That is unlike Elias. He is a creature of habit." Dr. Reed adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps he worked through the night. Inspiration strikes at strange hours." But Poirot saw the unease spreading like ripples across the table. Victor Kane drained his coffee in one gulp and reached for the cognac bottle that had appeared beside the marmalade. Lydia Thorne's hands trembled as she buttered a roll she did not eat. Even the quiet harpist, Elena Moreau, kept glancing towards the door. At 9 o'clock, when Frost still had not appeared, Laurent suggested someone check the music hall. Keller volunteered at once, almost eagerly. Poirot, sensing the moment when curiosity becomes concern, rose as well. "I will accompany you, monsieur. The halls are unfamiliar to me, and I wish to admire the acoustics by daylight." They walked together through the dimly lit corridors, boots echoing on the polished wood. The music hall doors stood closed. Keller pushed them open, and a wave of cold air greeted them. The stoves that usually warmed the room had gone out during the night. Frost lay in the center of the stage, exactly where he would have stood to conduct. He was dead, There was no mistaking it, even from the back of the hall. His body was rigid, arms raised as though frozen mid-gesture, baton still clutched in his right hand. His face was turned toward the empty seats, mouth slightly open, eyes wide and staring. A thin layer of frost glittered on his eyebrows and the famous silver hair. His black tailcoat was stiff with rime. The white shirt front sparkled as though dusted with diamonds. Keller stopped just inside the door. Mon Dieu! Poirot moved forward swiftly, his eyes taking in every detail. The orchestra's chairs were arranged as they had been the previous evening. Music stands held the same scores. Instruments rested in their places, untouched. Only the ice sculpture of the treble clef had melted considerably, leaving a wide puddle that had spread across the parquet almost to the conductor's podium. Poirot knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything. The cold radiating from frost was intense, unnatural. He touched the maestro's cheek with the back of one finger, hard as marble. Yet the hall, though chilly, was not cold enough to freeze a man solid in a few hours. "Rigor mortis is complete," Poirot murmured, "and yet there is this glaciation. Curious, most curious." He examined the baton. A faint residue, white crystals, clung to the cork grip. He sniffed cautiously. A bitter almond scent, very faint beneath the cold. Keller had recovered enough to step closer. "Heart attack! The altitude! The excitement!" "No," Poirot said firmly, observed the pose. "He died conducting an invisible orchestra. That is not the collapse of a heart attack. That is deliberate." He rose and surveyed the stage. Footprints, only one set, led from the side door to the podium and back again. They were Frost's own, from formal patent shoes. No others marred the thin film of frost on the floor. Poirot crossed to the melted ice sculpture. In the widening puddle lay the small glass vial he had noticed the night before. Now it was empty, its stopper missing. The label, in German, read, "Extract von Gefrierfisch Antifrostprotein, nur für Forschungszwecke." A research preparation derived from Antarctic fish that prevented freezing, ironic given the appearance of the corpse. He pocketed the vial carefully, using his handkerchief. Keller watched him, face pale. Poison? Undoubtedly, but how administered and by whom? That is the question. They returned to the breakfast room together. The moment they appeared in the doorway, all conversation ceased. Poirot did not prolong the suspense. "Mesdames et messieurs, I regret to inform you that Maestro Elias Frost is dead. He has been murdered." A collective gasp rose. Isabella Voss pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Lydia Thorne went white as the snow outside. Victor Kane swore softly and poured himself a large cognac. Elena Moreau crossed herself. Only Gustav Lang, the composer, remained expressionless, drawing slowly on his cigarette. Laurent stammered. "Murdered? But how? The storm. No one could have entered or left." "Precisely," Poirot replied. "The murderer is here, among us." He suggested they all remain in the salon, while he conducted initial inquiries. Laurent, recovering his authority, agreed to keep the music hall locked until the authorities could be reached. Though with telephone lines down and roads impassable, that might be days away. Poirot began with the staff, the chef, 2 maids, the handyman who tended the stoves. All had retired early and heard nothing unusual. The handyman confirmed the music hall stoves had been banked at 11 p.m. They should have lasted until morning. Next, the musicians one by one. Isabella Voss, dry-eyed now, declared she had gone straight to bed after the rehearsal and slept deeply. Her room was next to Frost's. She had heard no sound from his side. Adrian Keller admitted he had lingered in the library until midnight, reading scores, then gone to his room on the 3rd floor. He had seen no one. Lydia Thorne claimed insomnia. She had played the piano softly in the small practice room until 2 a.m., then retired. Dr. Reed said he had taken a sleeping powder and remembered nothing until morning. Victor Kane confessed to drinking heavily in his room and passing out fully dressed. Elena Moreau had read by candlelight. She feared the dark and heard only the storm. Gustav Lang stated he worked on revisions to his composition until 4 a.m., then slept. All alibis were weak, none verifiable. All had opportunity in the isolated hours of the night. Poirot returned to the music hall alone. He studied the footprints again, measured the distance from the side door, noted the exact position of the body. He examined the baton under better light. The crystalline residue was definitely present. Finally, he stood where Frost had died and raised his own arms in imitation. The pose pointed the baton directly at the first violin desk, Isabella's chair. A message, a final accusation, or simple coincidence? As he lowered his arms, his gaze fell upon something glinting beneath the conductor's podium. He retrieved it carefully. A single cufflink, gold with a tiny emerald. It was not Frost's. His had been onyx. This belonged to Adrian Keller. Poirot had noticed it the previous evening, catching the light whenever Keller gestured. He pocketed the cufflink beside the vial. Outside, the blizzard continued its silent roar. Inside, 12 people, 11 living, 1 dead, were locked together in a mansion of music turned mausoleum. Hercule Poirot felt the familiar thrill stir within him. The little grey cells were awake. The symphony had fallen silent, but the investigation was only beginning. Chapter 3. Echoes of Envy. The blizzard had not relented. By midday, snow had drifted to the second-floor windows on the northern side of the chalet, turning the corridors into dim tunnels, lit only by flickering oil lamps. The electricity had failed shortly after Poirot's announcement of murder, and the generator in the basement refused to start. They were now truly isolated, warm enough, thanks to log fires in every room, but plunged into a gloom that matched the mood of the inhabitants. Poirot had commandeered the small library as his temporary headquarters. Books on music theory lined the walls, and a handsome walnut desk faced a fireplace where flames danced. One by one, he summoned the members of the orchestra for private conversation. He wished, he said politely, to eliminate possibilities and establish the precise relationships between Maestro Frost and those who had lived and worked so closely with him. He began with Isabella Voss. She entered wrapped in a black shawl, eyes red from weeping, yet her beauty remained striking. She sat opposite Poirot, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began gently, "you were, I believe, more than merely the first violinist to Maestro Frost." She lifted her chin. "Yes. Elias and I were lovers. For 2 years. It was passionate. He was a genius, monsieur. Difficult, demanding, but a genius. And recently—" a shadow crossed her face. "Recently, he spoke of ending it. He said I distracted him from his art, that at his age he needed calm, not tempest." Her voice hardened. "He had begun to look at Lydia Thorne in a way that made my blood boil." "Lydia the pianist?" Isabella nodded. "She is younger, quieter. She flatters him endlessly. I saw them together in the practice room 2 nights ago, her hand on his arm, his head bent close to hers over the score. I confronted him later. We quarrelled bitterly. He told me I was hysterical, that I imagine things. Poirot leaned forward, and last night, after the rehearsal, I went to my room. I took a sleeping draught, a strong one. I heard nothing until morning. Poirot thanked her and dismissed her with a courteous bow. He made a small note in his leather-bound notebook. Jealousy, strong motive. Alibi, self-administered draft, unverifiable. Next came Dr. Harlan Reed, the cellist. Reed removed his spectacles and polished them nervously before speaking. He was a precise man, academic in manner. Maestro Frost and I had professional differences, monsieur, nothing more. Yet I observed tension last night during the Lang composition. Reed sighed. Gustav Lang's new work quotes, almost note for note, a cello cadenza I composed 15 years ago and showed to Frost in confidence. He dismissed it then as derivative. Now it appears much altered as the centerpiece of Lang's symphony. Frost championed the piece enthusiastically. He knew it was mine. He never acknowledged it. Theft, then. Artistic theft. Common enough, alas, but galling. And you confronted him? Several times. He laughed it off. Said inspiration is communal. Last week in Vienna I threatened legal action. He warned me that if I persisted, he would ensure I never played in a major orchestra again. He had that power. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And last night, I took a powder and slept deeply. My room is at the far end of the east wing. I heard nothing. Another note. Plagiarism. Motive of revenge and career preservation. Alibi weak. Victor Kane, the bassoonist, arrived smelling strongly of whiskey even at 2 in the afternoon. His red face glistened with sweat despite the cold. Frost lent me money, he blurted before Poirot could frame a question. A great deal. Gambling debts, Monte Carlo last summer, I couldn't repay. He held the notes, threatened to expose me to the orchestra board. I'd have been finished. How much? 40,000 Swiss francs. Kane laughed bitterly. He enjoyed the power. Said I played better when afraid. And last night, drunk in my room, passed out. Ask the empty bottles. Poirot dismissed him with a glance of mild disgust. Adrian Keller, the assistant conductor, entered next. He moved with controlled grace, but Poirot noted the clenched fists. You wish to succeed, Maestro Frost, Poirot said directly. Keller met his gaze steadily. Yes, I have waited 10 years in his shadow. He promised me the conductorship of the tour next season, then withdrew the offer last month. Said I was not yet ripe. He enjoyed keeping us all dangling. And the cufflink found beneath the podium? Keller paled slightly. I noticed it missing this morning. I was on stage briefly after rehearsal, discussing tempo with Elias. It must have fallen then. Convenient, or inconvenient depending on one's viewpoint. Poirot studied him. Ambition, sharp as a stiletto. Opportunity, undeniable. Lydia Thorne came in trembling. She could barely speak at first. I admired him greatly, she whispered, more than admired. He encouraged me, said I had delicate touch. We spent hours together on the Brahms concerto. He hinted that after this retreat, she stopped, tears spilling, that he would leave Mademoiselle Voss for you. She nodded miserably. But I would never have harmed him. Never. Poirot asked softly about the practice room at 2 a.m. She insisted she had played alone, softly, so as not to disturb anyone. Elena Moreau, the harpist, was calm, almost serene. I had no quarrel with Maestro Frost, she said in her soft French accent. He was kind to me. My instrument is difficult to transport. He always ensured it travelled safely. And yet you seemed watchful last night. She hesitated. I saw something. After rehearsal, when most had gone to the salon, I returned for my gloves. I saw Mr. Keller and Maestro Frost arguing behind the stage, heated words. Then Mr. Keller stormed out through the side door. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You are certain? I am. A valuable observation. Finally, Gustav Lang, the composer, entered trailing cigarette smoke. He seemed almost amused by the proceedings. Frost was a tyrant, he said bluntly, but a brilliant one. My new work owes much to his suggestions. We argued constantly. He wanted changes, I resisted, but it was artistic disagreement, nothing personal. And the cadenza that so resembles Dr. Reed's? Lang shrugged elegantly. Coincidence? Or perhaps Reed flatters himself. Motifs float in the air. We all breathe them. Poirot did not press further. When all interviews were complete, he sat alone by the fire, arranging his facts like notes on a score. Motives abounded. Love betrayed, ambition thwarted, plagiarism, debt, humiliation. He rose and went to the music hall, now guarded by Laurent's handyman. The body of Frost had been moved to a cold storeroom behind the kitchens, improvised morgue. Poirot examined it once more under lamplight. The frozen rigidity remained. The skin had a faint bluish tint. He noted again the direction of the baton, pointing precisely at Isabella's chair. Then he turned his attention to the side door Elena had mentioned. It opened onto a narrow corridor, leading to the servants' stairs and eventually the rear entrance. Snow had drifted against the outer door, but faint scrape marks suggested it had been opened during the night. He followed the corridor to a small cloakroom. On a hook hung Adrian Keller's overcoat, damp at the hem, with a few melting snowflakes still clinging to the wool. Keller had gone outside during the night, but the footprints in the hall had been only Frost's. Poirot returned to the library deep in thought. As evening approached, the group gathered in the main salon for a subdued meal. Tension crackled like the fire. Conversation was forced. Glances darted suspiciously. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from the music hall. Everyone rushed toward the sound. They found Lydia Thorne standing in the doorway, hand over her mouth. On Isabella Voss's music stand lay her violin bow, its horsehair cleanly cut through, the strands hanging limp and useless. Someone had entered the locked hall and sabotaged the prima donna's instrument. The killer, Poirot realized with a chill, was not finished. Fear rippled through the room like a discordant glissando. Outside, the wind howled anew, as though mocking their fragile illusions of safety. Poirot surveyed the pale faces around him. The echoes of envy had grown louder and far more dangerous. Chapter 4. The Frozen Interlude. The second night in the Chalet des Mélodies fell heavier than the first. With the power still out, the corridors were lit only by candles and oil lamps that threw long, wavering shadows across the panelled walls. The wind had dropped to an eerie moan, but snow continued to fall in thick, silent curtains. No one could sleep easily. Doors opened and closed along the guest wing. Footsteps padded softly on carpeted floors. Fear had become a living presence among them. Hercule Poirot, however, worked. After the discovery of the sabotaged violin bow, he had ordered the music hall locked again, and the key entrusted to Monsieur Laurent personally. Then he retired to the library, spread a large sheet of paper on the desk, and began to draw a precise plan of the ground floor. He marked every door, every window, every staircase, every chimney flue. Next he added the movements he knew of on the night of the murder. Frost's final walk to the hall, Keller's damp overcoat, Elena's glimpse of the argument, Lydia's late night practicing. A pattern was trying to emerge, but one vital section remained blank. How the murderer had entered and left the music hall without leaving additional footprints on the frosted parquet. At 3 a.m, unable to sleep, Poirot donned his heavy overcoat and fur-lined boots, took a lantern, and slipped quietly downstairs. The house was still, save for the occasional crackle of a dying fire. He let himself into the music hall with the spare key Laurent had reluctantly provided. The cold in the vast room struck him like a physical blow. Frost's body had been removed, but the chill lingered. Poirot's lantern cast a golden pool of light that glinted off the instruments and the remaining puddle from the melted ice sculpture. He walked slowly around the stage, examining walls and panelling. On the left side, behind the harp's usual position, his fingers detected a faint seam in the oak wainscoting. He pressed, pushed, twisted a decorative rosette, and a narrow section swung inward on silent hinges. A secret passage? It was barely wide enough for a man of average build. Dust lay thick on the floor, but recent scuff marks showed that someone had used it within the last day or two. Poirot followed it cautiously. The passage ran behind the music hall, turned sharply, and descended a narrow spiral stair concealed within the thickness of the wall. It emerged in the wine cellar, behind a rack of burgundy bottles that swung aside like another door. From the cellar, a short corridor led to the rear boot room and the outer door to the terrace. That door had been forced during the night. Splinters around the lock proved it, yet no snow had blown in. Someone had closed it carefully afterward. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. Here was the means. The murderer had entered from outside, traversed the passage, committed the deed, and departed the same way, leaving only Frost's own footprints visible on the stage. But why go outside at all in a blizzard? He returned to the music hall and stood pondering. The answer came with the lantern light falling on a small garden door set into the rear wall of the stage, an emergency exit almost hidden by heavy velvet curtains. It opened onto a narrow covered walkway that led to the frozen ornamental garden. Poirot opened the door. A blast of icy air swept in, carrying fine crystals of snow. The walkway was sheltered by an overhang of roof, so footprints would not have filled completely. He stepped out, lantern raised. There, half buried in drifted snow, were faint impressions leading to a small stone fountain now encased in ice. Beside the fountain lay a broken glass vial, identical to the one he had found earlier, its contents long since absorbed into the snow. Nearby, almost invisible against the white, was a single black glove. He picked it up carefully. Inside the cuff was embroidered a tiny monogram, L.T. Lydia Thorne. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The pianist's alibi, playing softly until 2 a.m., had placed her far from the music hall. Yet here was evidence that she had been outside, in the bitter cold, close to the time of death. He pocketed the glove and returned indoors, relocking everything behind him. Dawn brought no relief. The sky remained leaden, the snow unrelenting. At breakfast, the atmosphere was brittle. Isabella Voss had discovered her ruined bow and refused to speak to anyone. Victor Kane nursed a hangover and a fresh tumbler of whiskey. Adrian Keller paced like a caged animal. Poirot waited until they were all assembled, then addressed them calmly. Mesdames et messieurs, I have discovered a secret passage that connects the music hall to the wine cellar and thence to the outside. It explains how the murderer could approach and depart without leaving traces on the stage. A murmur rose. Eyes darted suspiciously. Furthermore, Poirot continued, I have examined the frozen garden. There, I found a second vial, empty, and a lady's glove bearing the initials LT. Lydia Thorne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That is mine, but I lost it days ago, during a walk before the storm worsened. Convenient, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, yet the glove was beneath fresh snow. It was dropped last night or early this morning. Lydia's delicate face crumpled. I swear I did not, Isabella interrupted sharply. You were jealous of me, Lydia. You wanted Elias for yourself. You poisoned him, and now you try to sabotage me so that I cannot play. That is untrue, Lydia cried. I adored him. I would never. Enough. Poirot's voice cut through the rising clamour. Accusations without proof are worthless. We deal in facts. He turned to Lydia. Mademoiselle, you claim to be practicing until 2 o'clock. Did anyone hear you? She shook her head miserably. The practice room is soundproofed. I played very softly in any case. Poirot nodded. Then we must consider opportunity as well as motive. He requested that everyone remain in the main salon, while he continued his investigations. Laurent, pale but cooperative, agreed to serve coffee and keep watch. Alone again, Poirot returned to the secret passage. This time he examined it by daylight, filtering through a small grated window high in the wall. Halfway along, on a dusty ledge, he found something that made his green eyes gleam. A torn fragment of sheet music, its corner blackened as though scorched. The notation was in Gustav Lang's spidery hand, the very cadenza that had caused such bitterness between the composer and Dr. Reed. Why would a page of Lang's score be hidden here? Poirot folded it carefully and placed it with the glove and vials in his pocket. As he emerged into the wine cellar, he heard voices overhead raised angry. He climbed the servants' stairs quietly and paused outside the kitchen door. Adrian Keller and Gustav Lang were arguing. "You fool!" Keller hissed. "If Poirot finds that passage, he'll trace it straight to what?" Lang replied coolly. "To an architectural curiosity built by an eccentric millionaire? It proves nothing. It proves someone could move unseen. And after last night's little stunt with the bow—" "That was not me," Lang interrupted. "Though I confess I am glad someone did it. Voss deserves to suffer a little." Their voices dropped as a maid entered. Poirot retreated silently. Back in the library, he added new lines to his plan. The passage changed everything. Alibis that depended on being heard or not heard in distant rooms were now meaningless. Anyone could have slipped through the chalet unseen. He sat back and allowed the little grey cells to work. The poison, derived from Antarctic fish proteins normally used to prevent freezing, had been reversed in purpose, combined with another agent to induce rapid, lethal hypothermia. The vial labels confirmed it was a rare research substance, not commercially available. Someone with scientific connections had acquired it. Dr. Harlan Reed had trained as a biochemist before turning to music. Lydia Thorne's late husband had been a marine biologist specializing in polar research. 2 possible sources. And the baton, coated with the crystalline residue, had been the delivery method. Frost always gripped it bare-handed. A quick substitution during the night. Poirot closed his eyes and reconstructed the sequence. Frost alone in the hall, studying scores under lamplight. The murderer enters via the passage, offers a new baton, perhaps claiming it is better balanced. Frost, absorbed in music, accepts without question. Within minutes, the poison takes effect. The murderer poses the dying man in his final conducting gesture, a cruel flourish, then departs the way he came, leaving the hall apparently untouched. But whose flourish? Whose sense of theatre? Outside, the light began to fail again, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. The frozen garden lay silent under its white shroud, keeping its secrets a little longer. Poirot rose. There was one more place to search, the rooms of Lydia Thorne and Dr. Reed. The net was tightening. The frozen interlude was drawing to its close, and soon the orchestra would face a reckoning far more chilling than any blizzard. Chapter 5. Harmonies of Deception. The third day dawned no brighter than the previous ones does. A pale, diffused light seeped through the snow-plastered windows, turning the interior of the chalet into a world of grey shadows. The generator had been coaxed back to life for a few hours the night before, but now it sputtered again, leaving them once more to candles and firelight. The air felt thick with suspicion. Every glance lingered too long. Every silence carried weight. Hercule Poirot had decided it was time to stir the orchestra from its paralysis of fear. At 11 o'clock, he gathered everyone in the music hall, the scene of the crime itself. The chairs were arranged in a wide semicircle facing the stage, where Poirot stood beneath the conductor's podium. Frost's absence was a gaping void. The baton lay on a small table beside Poirot, like an exhibit in a trial. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice precise and carrying to every corner. "We shall now reconstruct the events of the night of the murder. Not in every detail, that would be impossible, but in essence. You will take your places as you did during the final rehearsal. We shall play through the last piece performed that evening, the new work by Monsieur Lang, but softly, with minimal movement. I wish only to observe." There were mutters of protest. Isabella Voss, her face drawn, clutched a spare bow. She had refused to touch her sabotaged one. "This is ghoulish, monsieur." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but murder is always ghoulish, mademoiselle. And the murderer among us has already shown a taste for theatre. Let us provide a stage upon which the truth may reveal itself." Reluctantly, they obeyed. Instruments were lifted, music stands adjusted. Adrian Keller offered to conduct in Frost's place, but Poirot declined politely. "I shall conduct myself. I am no maestro, but I know the beats." He raised his arm, small, neat gestures, and the orchestra began Lang's modernist piece. The sound was thin and hesitant at first, nerves fraying the edges, but gradually the musicians fell into the familiar patterns. Poirot watched their faces, their hands, the tiny interactions. Halfway through the allegro, Victor Kane's bassoon emitted a sudden piercing squeak, a cracked reed. He lowered the instrument, face crimson. "My apologies, the cold, it affects the wood." Poirot stopped the music. "Continue without the bassoon, if you please." They played on. Poirot's eyes moved constantly. Isabella's fierce concentration, Lydia's trembling fingers on the keys, Keller's tight jaw as he watched from the side, Reed's scholarly calm, Elena's ethereal detachment, Lang's faint smile of satisfaction at hearing his work. When the final dissonant chord faded, Poirot lowered his arms. "Thank you. Now, observations. During the passage marked forte, Mademoiselle Thorne, you glanced 3 times toward the side door, the secret entrance I discovered yesterday. Why?" Lydia started. I don't know. Habit. I often look for Elias when he steps off the podium. Yet Maestro Frost was not there, and you knew he was dead." She had no answer. Poirot turned to Victor Kane. "Monsieur, your debts to the maestro were considerable. 40,000 francs, was it not? And yet this morning I found, tucked behind a cushion in the salon, an envelope containing banknotes to the exact amount, unsigned, but clearly intended as repayment. Did you perhaps decide that a dead creditor is the best kind?" Kane blustered. I don't know anything about an envelope. It has your fingerprints upon it, monsieur. The police will confirm when they arrive. Kane sank into a chair, sweating. Poirot continued smoothly. Dr. Reed, the cadenza in Monsieur Lang's work is indeed yours, stolen and altered. I have the original manuscript, recovered from your room. You threatened legal action, yet you remained silent after the maestro's death. Why? Reed adjusted his spectacles. Because a lawsuit against a dead man is pointless, and because I felt some relief. Relief that the thief was gone. Reed inclined his head. Poirot addressed the group. And then there is the matter of the will. He produced a document from his pocket, several pages folded neatly. Maestro Frost rewrote his will only last month. A copy was found among his papers in Vienna and forwarded to Monsieur Laurent by telegram before the lines went down. The beneficiaries are multiple. A bequest to Mademoiselle Voss of his Stradivarius violin, to Monsieur Keller the conductorship of next season's tour, to Mademoiselle Moreau a substantial sum for the purchase of a new harp, to Monsieur Kane cancellation of all debts, to Dr. Reed acknowledgement in the published score of the cadenza's true authorship, smaller legacies to others. Stunned silence greeted this. Almost everyone here, Poirot said quietly, stood to gain from the maestro's death, a most convenient murder. Isabella's voice broke the hush. Then why sabotage my bow? If I was to inherit the Stradivarius, precisely, Poirot replied, a clever touch of misdirection. Make it appear that someone wished you harm, when in fact you were favoured. He turned suddenly to Adrian Keller. Monsieur, you argued with Frost behind the stage, as Mademoiselle Moreau witnessed. You went outside in the blizzard, your coat was damp, and your cufflink was beneath the podium. Yet the will favours you greatly. Did you know of its contents? Keller's face was stone. No, Elias never mentioned it. Liar, Gustave Lang said softly from his seat. All heads turned. The composer lit another cigarette with deliberate calm. He told me himself 2 nights ago, after too much cognac. He said he was tying up loose ends, making amends before it was too late. He laughed about how grateful everyone would be when he was gone. Lang exhaled smoke. I thought it macabre at the time. Now I see it was prophetic. Poirot nodded. Indeed, but amends do not explain the poison. The toxin was sophisticated, requiring knowledge of polar biochemistry. Dr. Reed has such training. Mademoiselle Thorne's late husband did also, and she retained his research notes. Lydia began to weep silently. Then, without warning, a scream echoed from the corridor outside the hall. Everyone surged to their feet. Poirot reached the door first. In the passageway stood one of the maids, white-faced, pointing toward the rear of the chalet. The storeroom, where we put the maestro's body. Someone has tried to burn it. They rushed to the cold storeroom behind the kitchens. The door stood ajar. Inside, a pile of old sheet music and newspapers had been heaped around the shrouded figure on the makeshift bier and set alight. The flames had been smothered quickly by the handyman, who had smelled smoke, but the corner of the shroud was charred, and the air reeked of kerosene. Poirot knelt, examining the scene with careful precision. Footprints in the dust led to and from the servants' entrance. A kerosene tin stood nearby, half empty. An attempt to destroy evidence, he murmured. The body might have revealed more about the poison under proper autopsy. Someone grew desperate. He rose and faced the group clustered in the doorway, their faces illuminated by the flickering lamps. The killer is escalating. First murder, then sabotage, now arson. We are dealing with a mind that believes itself cleverer than the rest, but which is beginning to unravel. He ordered the storeroom locked and guarded. Then, quietly, he took Elena Moreau aside. "Mademoiselle, you said Maestro Frost was kind to you. Yet I found in your room a letter, unsigned, but in his handwriting, ending your liaison. He wrote that your youth tempted him, but that he must return to maturity and discipline." Elena's serene mask cracked for the first time. Tears welled in her dark eyes. "He ended it last week, gently but finely. I was heartbroken, but I did not kill him." Poirot believed her. The grief was too raw. As the group dispersed, shaken, Poirot returned to the stage alone. He picked up Frost's baton, the poisoned one now wrapped in silk, and examined it once more. Beneath the crystalline residue, almost invisible, was a faint groove where the cork grip met the wood. He twisted gently. The grip unscrewed. Inside the hollow shaft lay a rolled sheet of paper. He drew it out carefully. It was a short note in Frost's handwriting. "If I die suddenly, look to the one who benefits most. The will is my insurance and my confession." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The maestro had suspected his own murder. He had prepared for it. The harmonies of deception were beginning to break apart, revealing the discordant truth beneath. Outside, the blizzard showed the first signs of weakening. Gusts less violent, snowflakes smaller. Rescue might come soon. But Poirot knew the killer would not wait quietly for the police. The next move would be bold, and possibly deadly. Chapter 6. The Crescendo of Clues. The fourth morning brought the first real hint of change. A thin, watery sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning the endless white outside into a glittering expanse. The wind had dropped entirely. Snow no longer lashed the windows. Rescue, skiers, perhaps a snowcat from the valley, might reach them by evening. The knowledge hung over the chalet like a tightening snare. Poirot felt it too. The murderer would sense the approaching end and act. He began the day early, slipping into the music hall while the others still breakfasted. With a magnifying glass, he examined Frost's poisoned baton once more, paying particular attention to the hollow shaft where the maestro's warning note had been hidden. At the very base of the cork grip, he discovered a tiny wax seal, pale blue, imprinted with a minute harp. The seal had been broken when he unscrewed the grip, but fragments remained. A harp, Elena Moreau's instrument. Yet she had seemed the least implicated. He pocketed the wax fragments and moved to the orchestra's music library, a small anteroom off the hall where spare parts and scores were kept. There, on a shelf of orchestral supplies, he found a half-used stick of sealing wax matching the color exactly. Beside it lay a small brass seal, a harp no larger than a fingernail. Elena's property, undoubtedly. But why seal a note inside a baton? He was still pondering when Monsieur Laurent appeared, breathless. "Monsieur Poirot, the telephone line is restored for a moment. Only static, but the exchange says a rescue team will attempt the road this afternoon. Also, there has been another incident." Poirot followed him to the second floor. The door to Dr. Harlan Reed's room stood open. Inside, drawers had been ransacked, papers scattered. On the bed lay Reed's cello case, its lid forced, the instrument inside untouched, but the compartment for accessories empty. "My research notes," Reed said, appearing behind them pale and shaken. "The files on polar antifreeze proteins, my old biochemical work. They're gone." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The final proof the killer feared. the precise formula for reversing the antifreeze effect into a lethal toxin. He turned to Laurent. Assemble everyone in the salon immediately. No exceptions. 20 minutes later, they sat in a tense circle around the great fireplace. Poirot stood before them, small and immaculate, his green eyes bright with certainty. Mesdames et messieurs, the moment approaches when the roads will open and the police will come. Before that happens, Hercule Poirot will present the truth. But first, a small demonstration. He placed Frost's baton on the table, unscrewed the grip, and revealed the hollow interior. Maestro Frost suspected his life was in danger. He hid this note inside his own baton, sealed with wax. He held up the blue fragments and the tiny harp seal. Mademoiselle Moreau, this is yours, n'est-ce pas? Elena paled. Yes, but I lent it to the maestro weeks ago. He wished to seal a letter privately. A convenient explanation, murmured Isabella. Poirot continued. The poison itself required specialist knowledge. Dr. Reed possessed it. Mademoiselle Thorne had access through her late husband's papers. But the delivery, the substitution of the baton, was a musician's crime. Someone who understood Frost's habits intimately. He turned to Adrian Keller. Monsieur Keller, you argued with the maestro on the night of the murder. You went outside in the blizzard. Your coat proves it. You knew of the secret passage. As assistant conductor, you had helped arrange the hall many times and could have discovered it. Your cufflink was found beneath the podium. And yet, the will favoured you greatly. Why kill the goose before the golden egg? Keller's face was taut. I did not kill him. No, Poirot agreed softly. You did not. A stir went through the room. Poirot picked up a sheet of music, the torn page he had found in the passage. This is the original cadenza stolen from Dr. Reed. It was hidden in the secret passage, but why? To incriminate Monsieur Lang, or to retrieve it later? He laid it down and produced the charred fragment from the attempted burning of the body. Compare the handwriting. Identical. Monsieur Lang, you tore this page yourself, hid it, then tried to destroy further evidence, but you are not the killer either. Lang crushed out his cigarette with deliberate calm. Then who, monsieur? Poirot's gaze swept the circle and settled on Victor Kane. The bassoonist was sweating heavily despite the cold room. An empty glass stood beside him. His hand trembled as he reached for the whiskey decanter. Monsieur Kane, you owed the maestro 40,000 francs. The will cancelled that debt. You stood to gain freedom. But you are a man of poor nerves and strong drink. Last night, in panic, you attempted to burn the body, clumsily, leaving footprints and the smell of kerosene. Kane lurched to his feet. Lies! I was in my room. No, Poirot interrupted. You were seen by the handyman returning through the rear door at 3 a.m., reeking of smoke, and this morning I found traces of kerosene on your cuffs. Kane collapsed back into his chair, breathing raggedly. But you, too, are not the killer, Poirot said quietly. You acted out of terror, because you believed you knew who committed the crime and feared implication. All eyes turned to Kane. He looked around wildly, then buried his face in his hands. I saw, he whispered, through my window, 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone in a dark coat crossing the terrace toward the garden door, carrying something that glinted. Glass, perhaps. Then, later, returning. I thought it was Keller. Keller started forward angrily, but Poirot raised a hand. Description matches several coats, not conclusive, but thank you, monsieur. Another thread. Suddenly the lights flickered. the generator struggling again, and in that brief darkness a sharp crack echoed through the chalet. When the lamp steadied, Lydia Thorne was staring at her hand in horror. A small Derringer pistol lay on the rug at her feet. Smoke curled from the barrel. The bullet had buried itself in the wooden floor between Poirot's polished shoes. I didn't mean," she stammered, tears streaming. "I was so afraid. Everyone accusing—" Poirot retrieved the weapon calmly. "A lady's pistol. Registered to your late husband, perhaps. You brought it for protection in this isolated place. But fear makes dangerous music, mademoiselle." He turned to the group. "Enough shadows. We shall have light." He addressed Laurent. "Have the handyman bring more lamps. We will examine every remaining clue together." While they waited, Poirot laid out his collection on the table, like a museum display. The 2 empty vials, Lydia's glove, the cufflink, the wax seal, the torn score, the charred paper, the poisoned baton. "Observe," he said. "The vials came from Dr. Reed's stolen research, taken not to conceal, but to use. The glove was planted in the garden to implicate Mademoiselle Thorne. The cufflink dropped deliberately to suggest Monsieur Keller, the bow sabotaged to inflame Mademoiselle Voss. The body nearly burned to destroy autopsy evidence, all misdirection, all the work of a mind that believes itself symphony conductor of deception." He picked up the baton again. "But here is the mistake. The one discordant note. The wax seal of a harp inside the baton. Elena lent it to Frost, yes, but Frost sealed his warning note weeks ago, before arriving here. The wax is fresh. Someone opened the baton after the murder, read the note, and resealed it poorly, using Elena's seal to cast suspicion on yet another innocent." Elena gave a small cry of relief. Poirot's voice grew quieter, more deadly. The killer needed access to biochemistry through theft or collaboration, needed intimacy with Frost's habits, needed ambition great enough to risk everything, and needed a final, theatrical flourish, posing the dying man as if conducting his own requiem. He turned slowly to face Gustave Lang. The composer met his gaze steadily, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Bravo, Monsieur Poirot! A fine performance!" Lang reached into his pocket and drew out a silver cigarette case. He opened it, not for a cigarette, but to reveal a 3rd glass vial, still half full of crystalline liquid. "The antifreeze toxin," he said conversationally. "Synthesized with Dr. Reed's notes, borrowed briefly and returned unnoticed. Administered via a new baton I presented to Elias as a gift. He was touched. He used it immediately." He shrugged elegantly. "Elias promised to premiere my symphony. Then he began demanding cuts, changes, ruining it. He laughed when I protested, said true genius bends to interpretation. I decided he would conduct no more. The room was deathly silent. And the will, Isabella whispered. "A forgery," Lang replied. "Planted among his papers in Vienna by a helpful clerk, well paid. I needed you all grateful, or at least confused. Divide suspicion, you see." Poirot nodded, and when I began to unravel it, you escalated, sabotage, arson, planted clues. But the resealed baton betrayed you. A composer should know better than to alter another's score. Lang rose gracefully. For a moment it seemed he might bolt, but the doors were guarded now by Laurent and the handyman. Instead he bowed, theatrical to the last. The crescendo was magnificent while it lasted. Outside, the faint sound of engines reached them through the still air. A snowcat grinding up the mountain road. The blizzard had ended. The orchestra's darkest movement was over. Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. The little grey cells had triumphed again, but the taste was bitter. Genius turned to murder was the saddest discord of all. Chapter 7. Discordant Revelations. The confession hung in the air like the final, unresolved chord of a modernist symphony, shocking, yet somehow inevitable. Gustav Lang sat back in his chair, the half-full vial of toxin resting lightly between his fingers. As though it were merely a prop in a performance he had scripted himself. The others stared at him in frozen horror. Isabella Voss pressed a hand to her throat. Lydia Thorne's tears had stopped. She looked as though she might faint. Adrian Keller's face was a mask of fury and betrayal. Even Victor Kane, half drunk and trembling, seemed momentarily sobered by the revelation. Poirot alone remained calm. He stepped forward and with a swift movement plucked the vial from Lang's hand before the composer could react. "Merci, monsieur. This will be required as evidence." Lang inclined his head with ironic courtesy. "Of course, I have no further use for it." Monsieur Laurent, pale but resolute, motioned to the handyman. Together they took Lang by the arms and led him to a small anteroom that could be locked from the outside. The composer went without resistance, humming a fragment of his own symphony under his breath, a dissonant motif that made Elena Moreau shudder. When the door was secured, Poirot turned back to the shaken group. "Mesdames et messieurs, the danger is past. Monsieur Lang will trouble us no further, but there remain certain loose threads that must be tied before the authorities arrive." He returned to the table where his collection of clues lay displayed. First, the forged will. He held up the document that had caused such confusion. A clever fabrication. The paper is correct, the typewriter matches Frost's own machine in Vienna. The signature is excellent, but not perfect. Observe the slight hesitation in the loop of the F. Maestro Frost signed with bold fluency. This was traced, then inked over. A forger of considerable skill. He looked at Adrian Keller. "You, monsieur, spent many hours in Frost's study assisting with correspondence. You had access to his typewriter, his signature on letters. You could have prepared this forgery months ago, against the day it might be needed." Keller stiffened. "I did no such thing." "No," Poirot agreed. "You did not. But someone used your proximity to make it appear possible." He turned to Dr. Reed. "And you, Docteur, allowed your research notes to be stolen. Yet they were returned to your room this morning, hidden beneath your mattress." "Why?" Reed flushed. "I discovered them there at dawn. I intended to inform you." "After the attempt to burn the body had failed," Poirot said dryly. "Convenient timing. You wished to appear the victim, yet keep the notes close in case they were needed for defense." Reed said nothing. Poirot continued. "The sabotage of Mademoiselle Voss's bow, done with a thin wire, heated and drawn across the horsehair. A musician's knowledge, yes, but also a gesture of pure spite. Monsieur Lang disliked Mademoiselle Voss intensely. She had criticized his symphony publicly in Vienna, calling it derivative noise. He never forgave her. Isabella gave a small, involuntary nod. He smiled when he heard me described as temperamental. I thought it was amusement. It was hatred." Poirot picked up the poisoned baton, the true masterpiece of the crime, a hollow shaft lined with a slow-release membrane. The toxin, crystalline glycoprotein reversed with a neuroinhibitor, was embedded in the cork grip. Frost's habit was to warm the baton in his hand before conducting. Body heat activated the release. Death in minutes, paralysis in the limbs first, then the heart. The appearance of freezing was a side effect of the toxin's action on blood proteins. He paused, letting the horror sink in. But the greatest deception was the motive itself. All eyes fixed on him. Lang told us he killed because Frost threatened to ruin his symphony with demanded changes. Yet, I have examined the correspondence found in Frost's room. The maestro wrote to his publisher only last week, praising the work as a bold new voice. Perform it exactly as written. No demands for cuts, no threats, a murmur rose. Then why? Began Keller. Because the true motive was far older and deeper, Poirot said quietly. 20 years ago, in Prague, a young composer named Gustav Langer, note the slight difference in name, submitted a symphony to a competition judged by the rising conductor, Elias Frost. It was disqualified for plagiarism. The young man's career ended before it began. He changed his name, reinvented himself, waited. He produced a faded newspaper clipping from his pocket, found tucked in Lang's wallet during the brief search after the confession. Here is the report. The plagiarized work was none other than Dr. Reed's stolen cadenza, used without permission even then. Frost recognized it, exposed the theft, and destroyed the young Langer. Dr. Reed gasped. I never knew. I thought my early work simply vanished. Lang blamed Frost for everything, Poirot continued. He infiltrated the orchestra slowly, over years, earning trust. This retreat was his perfect opportunity. Isolation, a blizzard forecast, access to Reed's old research through casual conversation. He planned every detail. The posed body as a final mocking bow. The forged will to scatter suspicion, the planted clues to create chaos. He looked around the circle of pale faces. But he made one fatal error, the resealing of the baton with fresh wax. A composer should understand that the original score must remain inviolate. By tampering with Frost's hidden note, he revealed his own hand. Silence reigned for a long moment. Then Lydia Thorne spoke, voice trembling. And the attempt to burn the body? Lang again, Poirot replied. He persuaded Monsieur Kane, half drunk and terrified, that the body must be destroyed for the good of the orchestra. Kane, believing Keller guilty, obeyed in panic, a pawn in the final movement. Kane groaned and covered his face. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. Headlights pierced the thinning snow as the rescue snowcat crested the final ridge, followed by a police vehicle on tracks. Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. The performance is nearly over. When the police arrive, Monsieur Lang will be taken into custody. The rest of you will give statements. The orchestra will survive, perhaps stronger for having purged its poison. He looked at each in turn. Isabella's fierce beauty softened by grief, Keller's ambition tempered by shock, Reed's scholarly calm restored, Elena's serenity returning like dawn mist, Lydia's fragility hardening into resolve, Kane's weakness exposed, but perhaps redeemable. Music, Poirot said softly, is the most civilized of arts. It demands harmony, precision, passion controlled by discipline. When one player seeks to dominate all others, the symphony fails. He turned toward the window, where blue lights now flashed against the snow. But order is restored. The discordant voice is silenced. As the vehicles ground to a halt before the chalet doors, Poirot adjusted his moustaches and prepared to hand over the final, tragic score to the authorities. One last revelation remained, however, a quiet one. In Lang's room, searched thoroughly after his confinement, the police would find a locked journal. Its final entry, dated the night of the murder, read, "Tonight the conductor falls silent. The symphony will be mine at last, pure, unaltered, eternal." Beneath it, in smaller script, "Forgive me, Elias, genius cannot share the podium." Even in confession, Gustave Lang had sought the last word. But Hercule Poirot knew better. The truth, like a perfect cadence, always resolves in the end. Chapter 8. The Final Cadence. The police snowcat churned to a halt before the Chalet de Mélodie just as the late afternoon sun broke fully through the clouds, turning the snowfields into a blinding sea of diamonds. Swiss officers in heavy boots stamped up the terrace steps, their breath pluming in the cold air. Monsieur Laurent greeted them with visible relief, ushering them inside where Hercule Poirot waited, impeccable as ever, a small leather folder of notes in his hand. The formalities were brisk. Lang was brought from the anteroom, handcuffed without ceremony, and led away. He offered no resistance, merely pausing on the threshold to glance back at the silent orchestra members assembled in the hall. "A pity," he said softly. "The symphony would have been magnificent." Then he was gone, swallowed by the white glare outside. Statements were taken one by one in the library. Poirot remained present, clarifying details, ensuring no nuance was lost. The poisoned baton, the vials, the forged will, the journal, all were carefully bagged and labelled. By early evening the police photographer had finished, and the maestro's body, dignified now in a plain coffin, was carried down the mountain road that had finally been cleared. With the departure of the vehicles, a profound quiet settled over the chalet. The orchestra members gathered in the music hall one last time, not as suspects now, but as survivors. The instruments remained in their places, silent witnesses to the drama that had unfolded among them. Poirot joined them, accepting a chair near the fireplace that had been lit against the evening chill. Adrian Keller spoke first, voice rough with emotion. Maestro Frost was difficult, arrogant, even cruel at times, but he made us better. We owed him our standards. And Lang used that against us all. Isabella Voss stood by the window, gazing out at the clearing sky. Elias and I fought bitterly, but I loved him. I would have played for him until my fingers bled. Now, I will play for his memory, with the Stradivarius he truly meant me to have. Dr. Harlan Reed removed his spectacles and polished them slowly. My cadenza will be published with my name at last. A small victory, bought at terrible cost. I shall dedicate the edition to Elias, thief though he was in youth. Time tempers us all. Lydia Thorne, composed now, sat at the piano running her fingers soundlessly over the keys. I thought love would save me from loneliness. Instead, it nearly destroyed us all. I shall play quieter music from now on, Bach perhaps, order and clarity. Victor Kane, sober for once, stared at his bassoon. The debts are real enough, even if the cancellation was false, but I'll pay them. And I'll play sober from now on. Frost deserved that much respect. Elena Moreau plucked a single note on her harp, pure, bell-like, lingering. Beauty remains, she said simply, even after ugliness. We must keep making it. Poirot listened, his little grey cells at rest for the moment. He felt the melancholy that always followed a case, the recognition that human passions like music could soar to sublime heights or crash into destructive dissonance. At length he rose. Mesdames et messieurs, you are free to leave tomorrow. The roads are open. The Vienna Symphony will need time to heal, to find a new conductor, to perform Monsieur Lang's symphony, or not, as you choose. But perform you will. That is the miracle of your art. The score remains, even when a player falls silent. Keller managed a faint smile. Will you stay for the private concert we still owe our patrons, Monsieur Poirot? They arrive tomorrow by sleigh. A reduced program, but we wish to play. For Elias. Poirot considered, then inclined his head. It would be an honor. The following evening, the music hall was transformed. Candles replaced electric lights, casting a warm, golden glow. The few patrons, wealthy music lovers who had waited out the storm in the valley, sat wrapped in furs. The orchestra, smaller now without Lang, took their places. They began with Beethoven's Romance in F, the same piece that had opened the fateful rehearsal. Isabella's violin sang with a new depth, sorrow transmuted into beauty. Keller conducted with restraint and respect. When the final note faded, there was a long silence before applause. Then came Brahms, the cello solo taken by Reed with profound gravity. Lydia's piano wove delicate counterpoint. Elena's harp glittered like starlight. Finally, unexpectedly, Keller turned to the audience. We wish to close with the piece Maestro Frost loved above all others, Bach's Air from the orchestral suite in D major. No conductor tonight. We play together, as equals. They performed it without a baton, eyes meeting across the stands, breathing as one. The melody floated, serene and timeless, a thread of purity amid the memory of chaos. Poirot sat in the back row, eyes half closed, allowing the music to wash away the lingering shadows. Order had been restored, not perfectly. Human hearts are never perfect, but sufficiently. Justice had its resolution, like a perfect cadence returning to the tonic. When the last chord died away, the applause was gentle, almost reverent. The patrons departed quietly into the starlit night, sleigh bells jingling down the mountain. The musicians began packing instruments. Tomorrow, they too would leave. Poirot lingered a moment alone on the stage. He picked up Frost's original baton, the unpoisoned one retrieved from the maestro's room, and weighed it in his hand. A simple stick of ebony and cork, yet capable of commanding genius. He laid it down carefully on the podium, exactly where Frost had stood. Adieu, mon collègue, he murmured. You conducted your orchestra brilliantly, and your final performance, though involuntary, was unforgettable. Outside, the Alps stood eternal, under a vault of stars. The blizzard was a memory now, the snow settling into peaceful drifts. Hercule Poirot turned off the last lamp and closed the music hall doors behind him. The final cadence had sounded. The symphony of life and death moved on to its next movement.